thank you all for joining us today for the second Lunch and Learn of our series that kicked off last month. And this one is all about why qualitative. So rather than just loading you with all of this information about like what and how qualitative methods are undertaken, this is all about why. So it'll be more focused on kind of the value and the effectiveness of qualitative methods more broadly. Before I begin, I would like to humbly acknowledge that we are gathering today among Musqueam, Chemainus, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories. As a white settler of Spanish ancestry, I continuously reflect on the role of my ancestors on the colonization of the Americas, as well as my role in the accountability of ongoing harms. And within the context of the Women's Health Research Institute and health research in general, I'm highly passionate about health justice and equity. And so that's something that also gets reflected in how I approach research and how I set priorities for it with the people engaged in it. So what to expect from today? I'm going to introduce myself really briefly, and then we're going to go through kind of the how qualitative methods can strengthen science with a short activity that you're welcome to participate in. And then how the Women's Health Research Institute can support you in undertaking or integrating qualitative methods into your work. And the objectives for this session are to identify and describe the value of qualitative methods, to make qualitative methods more approachable or friendly, and to support awareness of qualitative method support and capacity at the Women's Health Research Institute. All right, so a little bit about me. I am currently a KT coordinator and qualitative methods specialist here at the Women's Health Research Institute. My background is in sociology, and I completed a Master's of Science at the UBC School of Population and Public Health, where I really focused on qualitative methods, community-based participatory action research methods, and social determinants of health. I have over a decade of qualitative health research experience. I'm not going to lie, none of my experience includes quantitative methods, just like mixed methods, really. But I'm very heavily skewed toward the qualitative. And I kind of boil this down to just my passion for stories. Outside of like health research, I have 2 storytelling initiatives that I would happily share about if you ever want to ask me about them. Outside of work, I enjoy experimenting in the kitchen, talking nonsense to my cats, and doing nothing in good company. Okay, so I just want to contextualize a little bit, like what we're going to be talking about today, who I am, and the services that we offer, like within what the services that we offer. So generally, the Women's Health Research Institute strives to inform health policy and care and programming transformations and solutions, all in the effort of attaining health equity. And to promote excellence and innovative thinking in women's health research. I have circled in green the services where I kind of currently am situated and where I provide support. And this presentation is, one attempt toward amplifying the consciousness of my role here, as well as, just the breadth of services that exist here at the WHRI. For transparency's sake, I'm going to disclose that I am 37 weeks pregnant. So next week is my last week. So at the end of the presentation, rather than referring to myself as support, I will be offering other opportunities for you to connect with WHRI staff and membership in order to buttress your qualitative efforts. So why qualitative research? While quantitative research is really good and effective and efficient at answering what questions, qualitative research is very adept at answering why and how questions, particularly as they relate to human experiences, human sense-making, human decision-making, human motivations, et cetera, and describing complex phenomena. And this can really be like a huge asset to work that's looking at integrated knowledge translation and or implementation evaluation, because in both of these cases, you're looking at promoting change. And so to really have a good understanding of like how people make decisions and like why their behaviors are influenced and impacted in certain ways within our social contexts, like qualitative methods are really adept at answering those questions and pointing us toward directions for like promoting these changes that we want to see. And just a little sneaky little something here. Even if you're a purely quant person, your science, your processes and your practices can really benefit from the ones that have been established in qualitative research, which I will be covering in just a moment here. So what is the process? In general, I mean, this is true of quantitative research as well. You begin with, what do I want to know? From there, you build a defensible rationale in terms of like, why do I want to know it? And then you determine how best to inform what you want to know. In qualitative research, just given the inherent subjectivity of working with people's experiences and stories, it is acknowledged that we carry assumptions throughout our research processes and practices. And so as such, it's best practice to acknowledge and account for them. Research philosophies are basically extensions of our personal beliefs and value systems relative to our research. I'm a big fan of this quote by Anaïs Nin, who's a Cuban French writer. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. And this is, as researchers, like we really decide what we determine is important to investigate based on what's important to us as framed by our worldviews. So to account for that, research paradigms can provide frameworks for how we make decisions concerning our research. So our research paradigms are made up of ontology, which is basically what we think is reality or true. And it kind of exists on a spectrum. You might be like, if you think that only one reality exists, then you would be a realist. And if you believe that multiple realities exist, as in each person has their own perspective, then you would live more within the relativist camp. From ontology, which is what is reality or truth, you go to epistemology, which is how can I know reality or what constitutes truth? And so that might be, some examples include objectivism, which is there is one objective reality. Constructivism, which is that reality is constructed and relational. Or subjectivism, which is reality is projected by the subject based on their own experiences. From there, axiology is what do I value? So that's really something that's something that in the next bit, we're going to talk about reflexivity. That's something that we carry through. Like our values shape how we think about what is true and what reality is. And whether that's done in isolation or in relationship or projected. And then all three of these influence and inform our methodology, which is how can I acquire understanding of reality, which is not to be confused with methods, which are the tools that we use to acquire understanding. Methodology is the rationale behind research design choices. And that's all informed by the other three. So reflexivity is basically critical reflections on what I think I already know, based on like experiential knowledge and or the evidence base, what I care, why I care about this, what I desire to accomplish, and what my expectations are. And those expectations might include like fearfulness about engagement with participants, cautiousness, hopes, desires, etc. You might, and all of this is relative to our positionalities. And positionality is our location within social systems, structures, and constructs. So just really quickly, you can either share about this in the chat or not at all. You can keep this for yourself. I think either way, this activity is always really valuable. This kind of activity, rather. And I'm going to model it a little bit for you, just so it feels a little bit more approachable. So in terms of my positionality, some of the things that you might be able to discern simply by looking at me is that I'm an able-bodied, cisgender white woman. In addition to that, I've got post-secondary education. I have secure housing. I am straight passing. I speak English fluently. I'm a Canadian citizen. And all of these things intersect to approximate me to power and privilege, which means that I have certain understandings about the world based on what I have experienced and similarly what I have not experienced. And this will form certain assumptions in terms of what I believe happens in the world and what's worth investigating. That being said, in terms of my values, I very fervently align with anti-oppressive and justice-oriented values. And so in terms of like my epistemology, in terms of like what constitutes truth, as well as my axiology in terms of what I value, like I am a social constructivist. I believe that meaning is constructed in relationship with one another. And so I endeavor to decenter myself as much as possible in my research in order to be able to really center the experiences of participants in setting priorities for research outcomes. To be able to locate myself in my own research is what allows me, what catalyzes my ability to be able to decenter myself in my own research. I can't decenter myself without first locating myself and being like, okay, I need to be mindful of the fact that I may project this or I may prioritize that, and be able to really listen to what participants are saying rather than what I want to hear from them. Because as the researcher, I have a lot of power insofar as like what I ask people and what I value in terms of how they respond and how I interpret it in alignment with what my goals are as a researcher. So in order to really align myself with my participants and to really be able to amplify what their experiences are elucidating about our systems and how to better respond to their experiences, I have to be able to locate myself. I'll give us a second to think about our positionalities and how our ontology, epistemology, and axiology can help us locate ourselves in our own research. And you're welcome to share in the chat or not at all. Either way, reflexivity is a continuous practice throughout research. It's very helpful to do it at the outset, so then your research questions are in alignment with your goals and with your design and eventually your outcomes. But certainly it's something that's worth doing throughout to make sure that you maintain the integrity of your goals and accountability to your participants. And again, although this is something that's really well established in qualitative research, all research would benefit from this type of reflection. No research is valueless. So once we've accounted for our worldviews and how we seek understanding, we're ready to formulate our research questions. So research questions are informed by existent knowledge, which can include experiential knowledge as well as knowledge from the evidence base. And they're aligned with methodology, so how we come to know things, our sense-making framework, basically. Our methods, which is how we find, collect, analyze, interpret, and report on what we come to know, so our tools. And our analyses, which is how we make sense of the knowledge shared with us, or our data. Our questions are formulated in response to the problem that we've identified, the gaps that we aim to address, and the impact that we desire to have. And I have these in quotes because it's, I personally have a bit of a qualm with deficit-focused language. I really prefer strength-based language. So, but also I acknowledge that sometimes looking at a problem is what illuminates opportunities. So. Essentially, research questions help us map out our research journey. But before we go off on our journey, we have to really think about what we're looking for and why we're looking for it. So concurrently, as we're formulating our research questions, we're going to start thinking about our research design, and we're going to start weighing our options. Depending on what you want to know, you may choose to go for full quality or for mixed methods, and your decision-making will very likely also be informed by what is already known about what you're interested in knowing more about, and what you have access to in terms of resources and data and participants and all of those things. So for instance, you may be interested in understanding how effective a treatment is, or at least that's where you got started. And you were able to access some quantitative data that has tracked rates of the efficacy of the treatment, the access to the treatment, and the rates of the condition. However, based on the literature review that you've undertaken, you anticipate that there's a discrepancy between how effective this treatment is and how well people are accessing it. There's a discrepancy where you see that there's high efficacy, low access, and you want to know why. And this necessitates a qualitative component. So your two options are, you go full quali because there's enough literature to support the notion that treatment efficacy is high, but access is low, and you want to focus on understanding how to address this phenomenon. Or you go mixed because although there is evidence to support the notion that treatment is efficacious, but access is low, you figure having local quant data can only fortify the impact of your investigation. So that's just an example of how you could either fully focus on qualitative methods to identify why is it that people are not accessing the thing and how can you promote greater access given how efficacious this treatment is. Or you can go mixed and say, this is the context. Let me paint this picture in terms of like what is happening, and then really dig into why it's happening and how we can address it in a very contextualized way, and then make recommendations to amplify these types of efforts. Ultimately, whether we choose to go full quality or mixed methods, we are all carrying desires for our research. We want it to do something. We want it to accomplish something. We want it to have an impact. And so to ensure the integrity of this desire and to build accountability into our outcomes, our research philosophies, paradigms, questions, and design must be in alignment. And this is true of whether you're doing qualitative work or quantitative work or mixed methods. But ultimately, as biased as I am, qualitative methods can really effectively and meaningfully promote how we desire things to be, as informed by people's firsthand experiences within our systems. So in conclusion, if you aim to inform changes in behavior, policy, services, programming, etc., and or address barriers, facilitators, gaps, or opportunities, please consider going quali or integrating it in some way into your work. But again, where to begin? Well, you can reach out to us. We have over 500 members at the WHRI, and that constitutes just heaps of opportunities to find synergies, to buttress really powerful and impactful qualitative work undertaken here among staff and membership. So I encourage you to check out our services online and reach out to us. Like I said, next week is my last week, but I will be coming back, I promise. And in the meantime, I encourage you to reach out to Nicole, as she is really adept at seeing commonalities and points of connection throughout all of the people that we are in partnership with. These are some of the references that I pulled from today. I would highly recommend the SAGE methods map. They do a really great job of, it's interactive. And so you can go into, say, like research philosophies, and it'll pull up all of the research philosophies, and you can pick one of them, and then it'll pull up all of the content on SAGE related to that. Same with approaches to data analysis, et cetera, et cetera. And then Science in Motion has a YouTube channel with really succinct videos about research processes. And there's one in particular called Your Research Philosophy that's like no more than 4 minutes, but really comprehensive and engaging. And I'll stop there for questions. And there's already someone in the chat. Nicole. Oh, Nicole. Do I have any lessons learned from working on mixed methods projects? Yes. So I would say something that qualitative methods are really conducive to are flexibility. They're like really responsive in design. And so this is also very true in mixed methods. There's been a few projects that I've been on that have started out as quantitative projects and then later on incorporated a qualitative component to be able to really flesh out more understanding of why this picture looks this way, and to also be able to further support the interpretation of the quantitative analyses. And so in this way, it gives a really comprehensive overview of not just like what is happening, but why from a very like human element perspective. And also when you have this marriage between quantitative and qualitative, you can also use the quantitative to find out where there are disparities in experiences, and use the qualitative to further inform understanding of why those disparities or inequities exist, particularly as they are in relationship with our systems. And this is really beneficial when we're concerned with health equity and access to health services.
Thanks, Julia. Sorry, I'm gonna just unmute, and because I have a follow-up question. It's such an important consideration, and thank you for thank you for I think shedding to light the importance and role of qualitative research. I think where I'm trying to sort of imagine myself is within a research team, and you mentioned, you know, qualitative is great in flexible environments. I'm imagining this from, how do you resource flexibility, and also how do you write it in a grant to be funded? So are there, I mean, I know that you've worked with such a fantastic like variety, like the breadth and depth of topic areas that you've worked in with on qualitative research with these sort of broad teams. Do you have any like pearls of wisdom, I guess, success stories, and also lessons learned from, you know, failing forward, which we all do?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and a huge consideration in qualitative research is how much time it takes. Quantitative research, quantitative analyses can be really quite fast, very, very efficient analyses. You know, you have a question, you have the numbers, you ask them the things, and you get your answer. With qualitative research, that like there's a lot more resourcing, and within the catchment of resourcing, I include time. That goes into recruitment, consent processes, data collection, and data analyses. Like all of those things take a lot more time. And so something that's really fortified my proposal writing has been leaning on participatory health research methods, and also looking into the decolonization of research methods, and looking at like patient-oriented research methods, and all of those that are a lot more participant focused. Because what that does is that it equips you with the language and the rationale necessary to really say, like, listen, these things need resourcing. They take time. Relationships and trust take time. I can't be asking people about their relationship with, say, like, I don't know, what's an example? One of the projects that I worked on had to do with like people who were incarcerated and the COVID-19 vaccine. Like I can't be asking people who are incarcerated and institutionalized in this way about why they're not accepting a vaccine when they don't trust the systems for very good reason. There's particularly among Indigenous people, like there's very, there's extensive evidence about like coercion, like medical coercion in carceral systems, particularly among Indigenous populations, and also medical coercion among Indigenous populations, just full stop. So, you know, to have these frameworks for engagement is really, honestly, it's really fortified my ability to rationalize why qualitative methods require so much consideration.
And Heather's got a follow-up query.
Thanks, Julia. Do you want me to, I can read out the questions. It looks like Heather and
Oh,
Travis are two data registry people submitted
Great.
questions at the exact same time. Heather is wondering if you support members and students to develop coding frameworks for analysis if they already have data. Heather, I'm guessing, you know, this, do you mean like from like open-ended questions in the data registry? Or other?
Actually, like we've done a whole bunch of interviews. We have lots and lots of interview data. So it's like rich qualitative data that's been collected over an hour and a half with people. And we had a student that kind of started and then left. And so we're wondering if there's a way to, like, if the WHRI offers services to kind of pick that back up and, you know, guide someone in developing a coding framework if we already have like rich data available.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's currently something that's within the scope of my role. I consult with teams in terms of mentoring those skills more than anything. So it's not necessarily that I undertake much of that labor, but I guide it. So then also, you know, we're nurturing capacity and confidence among staff and membership in these ways.
Okay.
Yeah, so short answer, yes.
Okay,
yeah,
thank
Heather,
you.
if you want, feel free to email like the project proposal to me and Julia, and we can see where we can go, just being mindful of Julia's imminent arrival.
Yeah, well, and we always have lots of data, and like qualitative data in particularly gets stale fast.
Yeah.
You know, so it's good to not lose momentum on things. So so I was just wondering if that's kind of, you know, part of your services to support people in developing coding frameworks and working with existing data that they may not have collected themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Heather. Travis's question is, does incorporating qualitative methods into research teams require designing specific qualitative items, or is it possible to take a qualitative approach to existing research projects? For example, with your running registry. I think, Travis, do you have, are there open-ended questions in the data registry? Or is it all?
There's a few, but not a lot of them. But I'm just thinking from kind of the perspective of at least our registry. I mean, it's a lot of quantitative data, but I think one of the aspects of our project that is maybe missing is that kind of qualitative, more descriptive component of it. And I was wondering, like, how you would incorporate those things into an existing project that's been running for so long. Or if it's possible, I don't know. I don't know enough about the space.
Well, I think if there's already been like qualitative questions incorporated into the data collection, then I would anticipate that there is some rationale already for like why those questions are open-ended, which means that there's already some level of integration there. And so really what it would be would, the question then would be like, what is it, like, why were those questions framed qualitatively, and what is it that you're hoping to garner from these qualitative answers, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, and it also, yeah, basically you want to know like, what is it that you want this to imply? Like, what are the implications that you want this to have ultimately, you know, this knowledge to have? And that will then kind of shape what approach you take. Yeah, and I mean, if you were looking for some guidance on qualitative description, Sandalowski has 2 really important papers on the strengths and benefits of qualitative description.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Travis, I mean, Julia, you can probably speak to this as well. I'm just thinking, Travis, if some of the data, if the manuscript from the CCDP is sort of in motion and there's some results from there. I don't know, Julia, if you wanted to touch on like the role of like qualitative sub-studies. So something that could be an offshoot of this work when it comes to, like you said, Julia, the storytelling, right? Like Travis, you have a lot of quantitative data. What is the potential role of qualitative storytelling in conjunction with a clinical data registry?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and tell Travis that's typically what we do is we use our quantitative data and the holes that we have in the quantitative data to facilitate research questions that can then be used quantitatively. So I don't know if that's what Julia would do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do this in like a very phase-like manner that you might first kind of scope out the picture, the general picture in a quantitative way, and then identify opportunities for qualitative inquiry. And you can do the opposite as well. Qualitative inquiry can be a really great way of exploring kind of the landscape, and then identifying opportunities for quantitative questions insofar as being like, okay, but like, what is it that can be accomplished here, given that this is the landscape, So it really, ultimately, it always comes down to what you want to know.
Right.
Because how you get to know it is predicated on what you want to know.
That's very interesting, and thanks, Heather, for explaining that. That's good to know. There's other ways.
Great. I don't see anything further.
I have a question.
Oh, there we go.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically in the beginning you said that I am number person. I appreciate that I work with mixed model, but I'm a number person. So in the beginning you say that you need to position yourself. And after that you went to epistemology, ontology, axiology, that it's very philosophical terms. It's like how I position myself in the world, what is the value of my knowledge. So if you position yourself and you're trying to answer all those philosophical questions, what you do not for your research not to be very subjective, because the way I position myself in the world is based on my educational background, my childhood, and where I grew up, what relationship with other people I had. And based on this one, based on position, probably my relationship with world and knowledge will be coming from my position in yourself. So how you make sure that your research is valued, is not affected based on your specific philosophy and understanding of the world?
It's a good question. Firstly, ultimately, what we're doing is acknowledging the fact that there is no way to avoid that, really. You can only account for it. So that's where reflexivity on positionality comes in, because it's at that point that you can say, well, I am influenced in these ways. And because I am influenced in these ways, they're going to, unless I account for them, I'm going to be impacting and imposing how I make sense of things into this work. So that's why reflexivity is something that's continuous. That is kind of like, oh, I see this and I find that really interesting. But am I seeing that because that's something that I really find interesting and I want to see from the data, or because that's part of my goals, it's in alignment with what I want to see? Or is it because it's what's coming from the data? Right? And so to have that continuous like practice of reflexivity is really valuable in being able to distinguish between what you're projecting or imposing as valuable versus what is inherently being identified as valuable from like by your participants in the like via the data.
Yeah, so basically in qualitative analysis, you have the same, because I can create the outcomes the way I see, like you say, oh, let's talk about sexual assault. Yeah, the culture of sexual assault in the community I grew up, like my understanding of sexual assault, it's different maybe from women that experiences in Canada. So I will quote the outcome, like, did you experience sexual assault? I might quote the outcome based on my understanding of what sexual assault is. So it's why in quantitative analysis, it's also very important to look on context of what you're doing, because you still easy can go and skew your result and bias result and choosing the model that give you desirable result based on your own experience. So it's kind of aligning, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I said that all methods would, all research would be fortified by these processes and practices, because we're all carrying values and assumptions through our work based on our positionalities and our experiences in the world. There's a really one of the where is it? So this Bolton reflexivity practice reading is really worthwhile. And then also memoing. Memoing is essentially a continuous reflexivity practice that's undertaken in qualitative research that I personally believe that all research processes would benefit from, because that's the continuous nature of tracking your sense making. I think of it as almost like, let's say you're going on a hike and there's trail markers. That's what memoing offers. Memoing is kind of those trail markers in your line of thinking when you're kind of venturing into the woods of sense making, and then you can make your way back from like where you're out, when you end up in your outcomes, you can make your way back to your original goals and make sure that they are in alignment.
Would the logic model help to do it? Because I work in social policy evaluation, and we did it was mixed model, like both qualitative and quantitative analysis. And actually we built extensive logic model to incorporate on each step of the research, to incorporate both strategies. So it's kind of kept us aligned through the way with reflexation and what we want to achieve and how we want to evaluate the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that all of the ologies in the research paradigm, those can create a framework for you that contain kind of your research roadmap, per se. Yeah.
Julia, there's just 2 additional follow-up questions from Heather in the chat.
Okay.
Would you recommend multiple coders or analysts? What are the pros and cons of that approach?
I'm gonna start with the pros. The pros are that it establishes intercoder consensus, which is one of the ways that you can fortify the trustworthiness of your qualitative analyses. And secondly, it can make coding more efficient, because your coders don't have to be coding all of the same transcripts. You can actually like divide the labor of all of the transcripts among coders, just as long as they do check each other's work on occasion. So they might, let's say you have like 20 transcripts and you have 2 coders, each of them do like 8 transcripts on their own and like 4 in common. And that way, you know, in terms of the development of the code framework, or what I would call a code book, there's consensus throughout the sense making, which is important because when you move from codes to then categories to themes, you need to have that continuity of like you're speaking the same language to eventually tell the story of what you're seeing, of the generalized patterns amongst experiences. And in terms of cons, it's more of an HR thing, I would say. The con, you know, just having to have more people and having to resource more people. But ultimately being able to conduct your work like more quickly and with more trustworthiness, I think supersedes the, you know, any type of worries about resourcing with HR.
Excellent.
Yay.
That was great.
Yay. Thank you, everybody.
Fabulous. Any closing remarks there, Nicole?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. We've got 5 minutes to spare. Appreciate all of you showing up today to have Julia talk about why we should incorporate qualitative research methods into our work. And Julia and Sabina, I appreciated your little discussion. I think Sabina, I think this is actually a good segue because I think Sabina is going to talk about, you're incorporating some philosophical considerations into your stats lunch and learn as well. I think.
Because I think everything is philosophy. No, if you're thinking about it, whatever you do, it's coming from philosophy, how you see yourself, and statistics. It's philosophy as well, because in statistics, when you have questions, it's still a lot of assumption based on what you believe, and it's introducing like bias or uncertainties that some of them you can work on eliminating what Julia talked about, like rigorously think what you want to do. And some of them it's just statistical bias and it is what it is. So yes, it's philosophy as well in a way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sabina. So Sabina is going to be our presenter for the next 2 lunch and learn sessions. So we do have a web page. I'll just pop that in the chat really quickly. So on our website, we have a web page that will list all of the subsequent lunch and learns. We are mindful that we're trying to sort out the registration and decide whether we just put the Zoom link publicly or whether we do registration just to make it easier for folks to come and attend. So stay tuned for updates on the website. We'll have better information on how to join for those who aren't staff. You all have it sort of earmarked in your calendar. July, I'm going to be doing the lunch and learn session on knowledge translation planning. My hope is that we can get some of the summer students to these sessions to really help them with, you know, preparing their end of term products. And then August is still TBD. But yeah, it's a privilege to sit here and learn with you all, and thanks everyone for showing up. And if you have any requests for topic areas or special guests that you'd like to invite to host one of these sessions, please let us know. Don't hesitate to reach out.